King David agreed because Abishai explained that there was no problem, no fear for his children. They had their own muzzle. The question was then, what happens now? So Abishai said to King David, now I'll say another Shem. You'll come down to earth safely, then we will pursue Yishbi together. Abishai said Hashem, King David came down. David came down, and right after many, very great distance, they could not get them until Abishai called out to Yishbi, your mother is dead. Your mother was killed. This news so shocked and paralyzed Yishbi that he became weakened, and then King David and Abishai together were able to kill Yishbi, this giant. After this, King David came back safely, and the generals insisted that he never go out to battle again. They will take care of all wars henceforth. One final item the Gemara asks, surely King David was greater in the knowledge of Torah, knowledge of Kabbalah, the knowledge of these names of Hashem to perform miracles with. Why didn't he himself say this name of Hashem and suspend himself in midair? Why did he have to have Abishai to help him? The Gemara answers that when a person is in trouble himself, he cannot help himself. He needs an outsider. The biggest tzadik, the strongest person, if he is in prison, the wisest person cannot free himself. He's in prison with his hands tied up. But if he's outside, he could figure a plan to release those who are in prison. And therefore, it required someone on the outside who was free to be able to use this name of Hashem, this power to suspend King David in midair and to save him. The Zohar Kodesh, the first Zohar Kodesh explained too, that according to the Gemara we can understand Yishbi's intentions, his act. Yishbi felt, in the back of his mind, of course he was Russia's very wicked, but he felt that cold-blooded murder of King David might be punished someday, somewhere. And so he decided that, knowing Hebrew law, that Groma ben Izakin, that if you cause, you're just the cause of harm, but not directly, then you're not to blame. You cannot be put to death for it. So he threw King David up in the air, enough that if he'd fall, he wouldn't be hurt much. So at the time he threw up in the air, there was nothing wrong. He did no big crime. Then he put a spear in the ground. He said, I'm just putting a spear in the ground, not to King David. It's not my fault if he happens to fall on this spear. These two acts combined could bring about the death of King David, but individually, nothing wrong with them. This he learned from the Mishnah, which says that a person throws someone's dishes out of the window. At the bottom, there are pillows where the dishes would not be broken. Then he runs down, he gets there before the dishes do, he removes the pillows. He's one of those races. He removes the pillows, and the dishes are broken. He is free. There's no penalty. Well, let's say it's done by two people. One throws it, the second removes the pillows. Neither one is guilty. So this was the plan of Yishbi. Of course, this plan was an error. Then he had Yishbi paid with his life. He was the first of the sons, the giants, to die. Eventually, the other three were killed too, as we find later on in the ensuing story. As we said, King David was then requested by his generals to remain at home, not to go out to battle anymore. This he agreed to, and we find the final chapter in the life of King David in the next Shir Mitzvah. We should be zecher again to the true Amunah Tzadikim, and to see with our eyes the coming of Mashiach ben David HaMelech. Amen. Amen. We continue the Shir in Navi. David HaMelech had been told, requested by his generals, that he no longer go to battle because his life was too precious, and there were enough soldiers to fight on his behalf. Also, in addition to the regular army of soldiers, there was a special class of giborim. Giborim means very powerful, courageous fighters who are unusual in this talent. This is a special talent. A person who possesses both courage and ability, this talent to do battle. King David had a number of specially talented fighters. Now there were three who were known as the Big Three, the Great Three, the three top giborim in his army. Above all was one known as Adino Ha'etzli. He was so great that with one blow he could kill 800 soldiers of the enemy. There's a debate in the Gemara as to who he really was. Some say that he was one of King David's generals, top fighter that he possessed. Others say that this was King David himself. David himself had the special gifted powers from heaven, the blessings from heaven, that in battle he could kill 800 soldiers with one blow, and about which the Gemara adds that King David was very sad as to why he could not reach the number 1,000. Of course, to go still deeper, the question is brought, what is this great pride in destroying people, killing? Is there such great pride in being able to wipe out so many lives at one time? After all, these are soldiers. True that they are on the side of evil. They are attacking the Jews. They are attacking those who are holy, children of Hashem. It is a command by Hashem that they go out to battle to wipe them out. But being proud of doing it, we find even Hashem too is not happy with such an item. The answer is that, in truth, Zayre Kodesh says, that Arizal says, that Arizal goes into detail on this, that in every evil being there is a spark of good. And this drop of good, this heavenliness in each being, is imprisoned in that being. To release that spark itself requires a very great tzadik. And this was the power of King David. He could take 800 of these Tomei individuals, to strike them down, to smite them down, simultaneously withdrawing from them all the nitzutzos, the sparks of kedusha, of holiness that were in them. This was his purpose in going out to battle, to withdraw the holy items, units that were imprisoned in these Tomei confines. Again, this first one, Adino Ha'etzli, was listed as the most powerful fighter in King David's army, according to one opinion. Second to him was one called Elazar ben Dodo, who was so great that he would do battle, and he would strike with lightning speed. He would stand and fight until his hand became so tired out he could no longer lift it. That's how strong he was, and he would not stop. Every time he raised his hand with speed, he would strike down another person, another enemy soldier. Third was one called Shemuel. This Shemuel, too, was so great a fighter, a battler, that when the Jews went into battle against the Philistines, and they found themselves in trouble, when they fled this battle, the entire Jewish army would flee a battle. Shemuel would stand alone and fight against the Philistines single-handedly and would win the battle. These were the three top fighters, top giborim of King David's army. Afterwards, there were three others, great battlers, also giborim. Second to these three top one was Avishai, commander-in-chief. That was the brother of Yoav. Note that Yoav is not mentioned here. Yoav, the commander-in-chief of King David's army. About Yoav it is written that all these feats, these accomplishments, these Gibborim were as nothing compared to Yoav's courageousness and physical prowess. This was what King David's army consisted of. Of course, it is understood that physical power means nothing. In the eyes of Hashem, physical strength is nothing. It is Hashem who decides and determines the outcome of any war. So if the Jews were obedient to the command of Hashem, they had the true religious spirit, Hashem was with them, they could win the war without these great heroes. It's just that Hashem showed them, He sent them such leaders as a symbol of the assistance of Hashem. Now the Torah tells us that one time, before you go to that, there's one more of the great fighters mentioned with King David. And this one, the Gemara goes into much more detail explaining. His name was Benayahu ben Yehoyada. Benayahu, the posek says about him that he struck down the two Ariel. Ariel means the two kings of Moab. He struck them down. That's the simple translation. The Gemara says this also means that he was so great in the study of Torah that Ariel stands for the lions, which symbolize the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. There was nobody who could match his knowledge in Torah, both of the Holy Temples, both Beis HaMikdash, first and second. It says that, the passage says about him that he struck a lion in a ditch when it was snowing, a freezing cold day. He struck this lion down because it is known that a lion is much stronger in the winter than he is in the summertime. So in the snow, Benayahu killed this lion. What is the reason for mentioning this physical accomplishment? The Gemara says this means that he himself was so strong, so filled with a unmatched fighting spirit for the sake of Hashem's commands, to battle against the Yetzer Hara, that when it came to the mitzvah of mikveh, mikveh is one of the outstanding mitzvahs that we have, not just for women, but for men too. For men to purify themselves in the mikveh. On an ice-cold day, when the waters were frozen, Benayahu broke the ice. This day he struck the lion in the pit on the day of snow and ice, which means that he had the courage of a lion to break the ice on a freezing day and to dip in the mikveh in this icy waters. This is what Benayahu accomplished, and it is very important to note that what Benayahu did served as an example for later generations. Because this is not a feat that was done then, thousands of years ago only. Later generations, to the present day, in fact, there are many great tzaddikim, many high-spirited Jews who did and do the same. In Ummah, it was known that the Arizal himself, of course, his Talmidim, would go out in the winter, break the ice, and dip. And many today came from Ummah, today in Eretz Yisrael, who had done that. Rav of Breslov himself was accustomed to doing that regularly, breaking the ice and going to the mikveh in the icy waters. The Arizal says, to go one step still further, just to touch on it, we won't go too deeply. We say the snow, the day of snow, the word shaleg, snow, it is known that in the old days The great tzaddikim used to accept self-inflicted torture upon themselves to forgive for their sins. But we cannot take this to account for ourselves now. We are not fit to do such things. It is enough that we obey mitzvahs without accepting tortures, without taking upon ourselves suffering. As the Gemara says, the ordinary people are on a level where just do what Hashem wants of you. Don't add any additional restrictions. Don't take upon yourselves a nazirus where you deprive yourself of drinking wine or other pleasures. Do what is permissible and refrain from that which is forbidden, and you'll be serving Hashem properly. But in those days there were people who did, those days of course means in the past, recent past, tzaddikim who would bathe in snow, in ice, as a means of suffering to erase their sins. And these tzaddikim were so great they didn't have sins that deserved this type of suffering. But as the Gemara says, the leading tzaddikim would take upon themselves a suffering that was so great to cover, to forgive the sins of the rest of the Jews. This is what's meant by a true devotion, a true leader of Jews. It's the tzaddik emes, is one who leads the Jews with such devotion that he's willing to suffer for their sake. Just as Mashiach himself, the Gemara says, is suffering for so many generations now to forgive for the sins of the Jews, so that the Jews should be worthy of his coming. Now this sheleg contains the word shegel, which means a sin that is fit for a dog, a very low type of sin, and that is a kelev. In fact, the word for kelev, targum, is shegel. So that Benoyahu took upon himself this tikkun, tikkun habris, by going into this sheleg, tikkun for chil habris, which stands for kelev, for dog. That is why Benoyahu, there's a lot of ben yud kei vav. Ben, which stands for both. Ben is the air. The ben also is shem bon, which is the letter after yud kei vav. Ben is the letter K, after yud kei vav, the final letter. This letter K is the shem bon, which is b'gematria kelev, which stands for the shem bon. Not the behemah, adam behemah, it's the evanukva. All this is included in Benoyahu, about which the Arizal says that we find that he was a tikkun for many others of the past. The Arizal says, though, it is better not to reveal his gilgulim, so we will abide by the Arizal's wishes there. Suffice it to say that Benoyahu ben Yehuda was so great, so holy, that, as the Gemara says, there were very few to ever match his greatness in either Beis HaMikdash. Now, the Navi, Torah tells us an example of the powers of King David's followers. One day, during a time of battle, King David did not take part in this battle as he had been requested to, but he suddenly said, I have an urge. I would like to drink the special waters that are found in a well in the land of the Philistines. He had tasted those waters once. He recalled that the water, how clear and sparkling this water was, and he said, I wish I could have some of that water. He just mentioned this wish. 3 of his Gibborim, Avishai, the brother of Yoav, and the other 2, this was the second line Gibborim, not the first 3 mentioned. These 3 took their swords and slashed a path through the enemy lines. 3 alone faced the entire enemy lines, cut a path through, went to this well, took the water from there, and had to battle their way back, and brought the water to King David and said, here, we brought you the water you wish to drink. King David was so emotionally touched by this act on their part that he said the waters which were brought at the risk of your lives, I could never allow myself to drink. I consider these waters holy. Therefore, I shall pour this water out before Hashem. I offer this water to Hashem. I will not drink it. This is the simple translation. The Gemara says that there's a deeper interpretation of this story. The interpretation, we say that King David desired to drink water. We always use the word water as a symbol of Torah, which means he desired to find out a special halacha, a din, the Hebrew law. Now how can he find it out? The Sanhedrin, who were in session, but it was difficult to get to them, he wanted to have 3 Giborim at the time to battle their way through these battle lines, reach the Sanhedrin and ask them this question. The question was an item which is discussed in Gemara, Machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. The question was Tomrun Ba'esh, which means that if someone damages the property of a private property owner, for example, as a storage or warehouse filled with wheat, if he sets fire to that wheat, of course he must pay for the value of the wheat. But what if in that wheat there are hidden special utensils, expensive small items hidden in those bushels of wheat? Is he responsible to pay for that which is hidden? This question he sent to the Sanhedrin to resolve, and these 3 Giborim went there, brought back the answer. The answer was that it is forbidden, of course. That wasn't the question yet. The main part of the question was not whether he has to pay for it, but whether if it is done in a time of war. In other words, his army is advancing, and in order to advance, to get to the enemy, or to protect themselves, they must set fire to the property of a Jew. But this property has hidden in it these expensive items. Now, can he do this, set fire to the property, and must he pay for these items that were hidden there? The answer was, they said, of course, there's a question of whether he must pay for what's hidden inside. However, since you are a king, you have a legal right to go through anywheres, break into anyone's property, use that property for your purposes, and you are exempt from any type of payment. King David accepted this statement, but said that since these 3 were compelled to risk their lives to go through enemy lines to get this answer, he would not quote the din in their name. Though it is a mitzvah to always quote the source, the origin of a halacha, of a din, in this case he omitted their names because of the fact that they risked their lives to get it, which was not worth it. It was not worth risking their life to get the answer to this question. In addition, the Yerushalmi says that the problem here was he asked for water, not to drink himself. The water was because this was Sukkot time. In Sukkot we have the Nisuch HaMayim, pouring water on the Mizbeach, and that is why he said, the waters you brought, I will pour out before Hashem. Before Hashem means on the Mizbeach. This is an example of the prowess, the courage of the fighters in King David's army. And these are the ones who led the Jews in battle for him. At all times they were extremely successful. Now we come to a special incident that took place. This, in fact, is the final incident of this Sefer of Navi, Shemuel Beis. Torah tells us that towards the end of King David's life, Hashem became angered at the Jews. In other words, a time had come for the Jews to pay for a certain sin. The sin was that during the life of King David, when they should have been loyal to King David throughout, to David HaMelech throughout, loyal to him as a king, loyal to him as a tzadik, loyal to him as a rebbe, as a leader, spiritually and physically, instead they turned away from him so many times, following those who rebelled against him. So there was a decision in heaven to bring a plague, to bring a suffering, a harsh decree upon the Jews. How to get that done legally? So we find, for example, the Baal Shem HaKadosh says, the last posek, last psukim of the Mizmor we say for Shabbos, last words we say that Hashem is just and does nothing wrong. That below Avlosa Bo, there is no wrong done by Hashem. Hashem is righteous and there is no wrong done by Hashem. So the Baal Shem HaKadosh gave as a mushal case where we'll have an earthly king who has a criminal brought before him. The criminal has committed a crime that deserves a death penalty. And the king is justified in sentencing this criminal to death. There's no question about it that he is doing something which is yosher, which is righteous. At the same time, there is a wrong resulting from this. Because though it may be true that this criminal has committed a crime for which he deserves to die, his wife committed no sin or crime which should make her convert her into a widow. Or his children are innocent. Why should they suffer as orphans? Or his partners in business. Why should they suffer the loss that his death will incur? So the king is doing what is right in killing him, but he cannot help himself having others suffer as a result. When Hashem punishes a person, if there are any side effects, it is only because those who are being affected deserve that type of punishment exactly. Hashem will not kill a person until the time has come for his wife to deserve becoming a widow, for his children to become orphans, and for everyone else who will suffer thereby to be party of this suffering. So here too, Hashem brought this about through an act of David HaMelech himself. The Satan, the Yitzhahara, Malach HaMavis, the same angel, got into King David and talked him into committing an act that was legally forbidden. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah is that you are not allowed to count Jews. It is forbidden to count them. That's why when it comes to a minyan, we cannot count to see if there are 10. We use a special formula by saying a certain posek, or the Beis HaMikdash, they had to raise a finger, they had to remove a yarmulke to begin with. There were special means in which Jews were counted, but you cannot count them directly. Here, suddenly, King David was filled with a desire to find out the population of the Jews, to take a census. And so he summoned Yoav and said to him, I want you to go out and count the Jews. Yoav was shocked. He said, what's the difference? As many as there are, may they multiply. King David insisted, told him to go out and count the Jews. I must have the number. It's as though the Spirit entered into him and forced his actions. And then, when this was done, King David suddenly felt a pang of conscience, a pang of deep regret and remorse. And then, suddenly, the prophet God came to King David and said, I have a message for you from Hashem. The message is that you have counted the Jews. The Jews may not be counted because if they are counted, then harm will befall them. But since they've been counted, something tragic must take place. but you will be the one to decide what that tragedy will be. You have a choice of 3 items. Hashem gives you this choice. Either the Jews shall suffer 7 years of famine, or they will suffer 3 months of constant, steady defeat at the hands of their enemies, or 3 days of a deadly plague from heaven. You must choose one of these 3. King David thought about this, and then he decided. The Gemara says that what prompted his decision was, first he thought, if I would select 7 years of hunger, then they would suspect me, the Jews would suspect me of picking something where I would not be affected by it. They'd say, I'm wealthy, I have enough food to live on, so I'm excluding myself from this punishment. If I would select 3 months of battle, war, defeat at the hands of the enemies, again they suspect me of being able to sit back at home and to be safe from the enemy. Therefore, if I select a plague, I am as much at the mercy of the angel of death as anyone else, because he does not discern between wealthy, poor, high society, or the lowest type of peasant. The angel of death strikes, he strikes at will. So he said, for the sake of the people's minds, to set them at ease, I will select the plague. However, he said to the prophet Gad, Yomer David el Gad, Nipla no biyad Hashem, ki rabim v'rachamov, u'biyad odom ala pelo. Said to the prophet Gad, if we have to fall into one's hands, let us better fall into the hands of Hashem, rather than the hands of our enemies, because Hashem is filled with pity, with compassion, with kindness, with consideration. We'd rather be at the mercy of Hashem for 3 days than the mercy of our enemies. The enemy is given the green light, the go-ahead signal. He can be so sadistic, so vicious, as to have no pity on the Jews and perhaps wipe them out. Whereas we find, in the case of Hashem, Kaviyachol, the Gemara tells us an interesting point. Hashem is all-powerful, and Hashem has his instruments of death, instruments of destruction. These are called the arrows of destruction. And Hashem says in the chapter where he speaks about a warning, a threat to Jews, if you will disobey me, if you will reject my mitzvahs, Hashem says, then I will send after you, I will strike you with my arrows. And all the arrows I have, I will spare none of them. I will shoot every last arrow I have into you. Imagine the arrows that Hashem has. These are heavenly forces with which he will strike at the Jews. Well, this is so awesome and so frightening that it appears as though there is no chance for survival. Hashem will send even one arrow to destroy a nation, to destroy a world, to destroy a universe. Here Hashem says, I'm going to use every single one of my arrows, to the very last one. Chitzai achala bom, the posek says. Every one of my arrows I will shoot till I finish every last arrow, which will strike into the Jews. The Gemara says it's a very kind statement by Hashem, because chitzai kolon, this means I'll use up all my arrows. Why? You don't shoot arrows at nothing. You've got to shoot at something, which means the Gemara says that the Jews will outlast all the arrows of Hashem. The arrows will come to an end, but the Jews will not. They will outlast the top degree of punishment sent by Hashem. This is a haftocha, an assurance by Hashem, that my people will never be wiped out. My arrows could consist of a united effort by United Nations to attack a small band, a small group, a small nation, a tiny country of Israel. We can have the concerted effort of all these evil nations, all with set one goal, to obliterate, to erase the last vestige of this tiny country. But they will not succeed, because throughout history, all the empires, the greatest world empires, have tried that, and they themselves have gone down to defeat. There is no trace left of them, of these same arrows that Hashem sent, because it is impossible to erase the Jews as a nation, the Jews as a people. Just as Hashem is infinite, eternal, everlasting, so too are the Jews. With this promise by Hashem, therefore, David and all said, let us fall into the hands of Hashem, because Hashem, even when He punishes, is so kind and so considerate that surely He will see to it that less of the Jews will suffer in the 3 days of plague than by the hands of the enemies for 3 months. So the Torah says that this plague began. And the plague began with the other cities in Eretz Israel. It went very quickly. The angel of death cut a swath, constant flow of blood of the Jews. It reached a total of 70,000 dead. First day. And they could see the path the angel of death took, as they could see how each Jew fell dead in that order. He had reached the gates of Yerushalmi. At that point, King David broke out with a bitter cry. He cried to Hashem and said, why should these innocent lambs suffer? It is my fault. I am the one that is guilty. I should be the one to suffer. Why should so many Jews pay with their lives for me? This was the cry of King David, the tefillah, a life that was filled with so much suffering. Note the life of King David. He was constantly being harassed, pursued by enemies. He never had a moment of respite, a moment of real true peace, a life of constant bitterness. But yet this life was what made us rich, because due to his trials, due to his sufferings, he composed the Sefer Tehillim. Sefer Tehillim is 150 chapters where he pours out his heart into these words with such deep emotion, such deep kavanah, so much feeling. Anytime a person, any Jew is ever in any kind of trouble or suffering, he need only take the Sefer Tehillim and read these chapters of Tehillim, and he can find himself, his own experience in these chapters of Tehillim. Every type of suffering, every type of anguish or agony that a person can experience is found in the words of David HaMelech in Tehillim. Any type of hispidiness that a person needs, he can use the Sefer Tehillim for it. The fact that it's so all-encompassing that the most important 10 chapters that exist are from the Sefer Tehillim. It encompasses all the 10 types of Negina. As Rabbi Nachman says, the 10 chapters of Tehillim, the 10 forms of Negina, which can cure the 10 poisonous arrows that were shot into the princess, or the cause of the gullus of the Shekhinah. This is the Sefer that King David composed, Sefer Tehillim. And how did he compose this Sefer Tehillim? Whenever he was in trouble, when he had King Shaul pursuing him, when he had Avshalom seeking his life, he had the other enemies who were out to kill him, when he had his battles with the Philistines, the rest of the Goyim, he would always turn to Hashem, pour out his heart and tefillah to Hashem, and he would compose these words then. Together, of course, the Gemara says, with 9 other great tzaddikim. Some of the chapters deal with composed the other tzaddikim too. But basically, it is by King David. And this Sefer Tehillim we now have, the Zechus of Sefer Tehillim, which is the key to Teshuva. Interesting to note how close Teshuva is related with Tehillim. Today shows that the first posek in Shemuel, Ela Shemuel Bnei Yisrael Aboy Mitzrayim, Es Yaakov ish uveisai bo. That's the first posek. And the Sefer Tevis, the last letters of those words, constitute the two words Teshuva and Tehillim, which show the relation between the two, which also makes up the Bnei Yisrael, the wholesomeness, the purity of the Jews, dependent upon Teshuva through the saying of Tehillim. So, in this case, David cried to Hashem to salvage the lives of the rest of the Jews, save them from this plague. And again, Hashem sent the prophet Navi God to King David and told him that he should offer a special korban, a sacrifice, in the yard of R Avraham Steinhartz. R Avraham Steinhartz was the king of the Yevusim who converted. Lived now in Yerushalmi. He lived there in a special place. This yard he possessed was actually the Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So King David was notified, now this is the place to offer a korban, because this is the place where in the future Jews will offer korbanos when they'll have the Beis HaMikdash. It would be advisable to buy this spot, to own it, and to start preparations for the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Since King David was told he could not build the Beis HaMikdash, at least he could build the foundation for it. So he set about to purchase this area from R Avraham. He approached R Avraham, and R Avraham said, if you want to offer a korban to Hashem, there's no question about it. A privilege like that, I give you my property free. I want no money for it. And King David said, I've learned an important lesson from our forefather Avraham Avinu. When he approached Ephraim to buy the cave of 4 couples in Chevron, he paid a high price for it for a very important reason. The Zohar Kodesh says that anything, any mitzvah to which you pay money is worth much more than a mitzvah which comes free. And that's why we find many halachos in that respect. When it comes to getting an aliyah on Yom Tov, especially Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the din says, be sure to bid. We have these, the offers of the aliyos at a price, then be sure to bid as high as you possibly can for the zechus of buying an aliyah. The Arizal especially speaks about that, stresses that point, about the value of bidding for these aliyahs, and how much more valuable an aliyah is, any aliyah, bought for money, than the so-called special aliyahs which come free. The same thing too with every type of mitzvah. The Gemara says in general, something that costs nothing is worth nothing. For example, Asya de Magal de Magal, the Gemara says a doctor who cures for nothing is worth nothing. That's understood. A doctor who cures for something is also worth nothing. In general. But where someone gives you something that may be beneficial, and he charges nothing for it, then you should be certain that there is very little value attached to it. Especially if it is something spiritual, then you should see to it to show your ahava for the mitzvah by giving of your money for it. As a symbol, so Arizal says, the first Mishnah Kedushin. We speak always about Yiras Hashem, is symbolized by the word Isha. Isha Yiras Hashem, Hitas Hawa. Fear of Hashem, mitzvahs, symbolized by the Mikvah, Isha. That's why the Arizal says if you ever want to learn about true emunah, true simple faith, you'll find that much more in women than you find it in men, because women have that simple sincerity. Therefore, women are the symbol of Yiras Hashem and mitzvahs. So too, the Mishnah says in Kedushin, the first words, Isha niknas bekesef. A woman can be acquired at a wedding as a wife with money. Rosenfeld says this means Isha Yiras Hashem, a woman, meaning the mitzvos, Yiras Hashem, can be acquired solidly, perfectly, much more strongly, if he pays money for it. Isha niknas, Yiras Hashem mitzvos should be bought. The kesef, pay money for it, then you have really acquired it. This is what King David did. He bought this place of Aravna. He brought up the sacrifice, and after the end of the first day, the plague ended. The Gemara says it ended because one person passed away who was equals to a large portion of the Jewish people. That was Avishai, the brother of Yoav. After his passing, the plague ceased, and King David brought this korban, the sacrifice, and upon which later we said that he built the foundation of the Beis HaMikdash. We should be zacha, be emes, to see with our eyes the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, the coming of Mashiach, and the Yameinu, Amen, Amen.